He didn't just lose his wife, he lost his humanity. But what is he really hiding? And why does he keep turning Sim into werewolves? Stay with me because today's story is going to get dark. You've seen the loading screens. Be aware of Greg. But who is Greg really? And why the other Sim in Moonwood Mill are concerned about him? Gregory Lunvik was not born into chaos. He was born into luxury. His mother Pernilla Lunvik actually ran a rug empire. They both lived in Semishuno, the city, but it was probably looking more like this since this was a long time ago. We actually don't know exactly what his mother looked like, and my interpretation of Greg is accurate to his physical appearance, but the hair and the clothing is a speculation I made. I rely on real Sims lore to make my interpretations and tell you the story of every character, so I read books, items, and research all kinds of character interactions to give you the best research. What's interesting about Greg is that he wasn't like other kids. He actually had a lot of rage. And his mother Pernilla used Greg as a way to test her rugs, so she would let him have his tantrums on her rugs, and if they survived, they were good quality. And her rugs were really good quality, and they did survive, but Greg's innocence did not. Greg and his mother were not werewolves at first. They were actually spellcasters, and they ended up turning into werewolves because of the vampire war, and spellcasters were trying to find a way to combat the vampires, so there were a few alternative ways to combat them. The history of werewolves and vampires is something we will discuss in another video because it does go quite deep, but one of the ways to combat vampires was to turn into a werewolf using the power of the moon, and those spellcasters were called mooncasters. And the mooncasters also had werewolf familiars, so werewolves that they were sort of pets but also really companions, and they actually took a lot of the properties of their companion werewolf and embedded it within themselves when they turned. So depending on the kind of companion you had, it affected your personality as a mooncaster. And Greg had a powerful werewolf called Brutus, and Brutus was an alpha wolf that was known for his power and aggression. And as you can predict, this didn't go very well because already Greg has a lot of aggression, and now he's combining himself with a werewolf that's aggressive. That just caused more chaos in his life. But then he met her, his wife. Avelina was super kind and also very smart. She was a mooncaster just like Greg, so she was working towards helping Greg with his fury, finding ways to combat that. And she did that through her research of the moon. She loved her telescope and she loved spending time just looking at the stars. She was actually the first Sim to discover the alien planet Sixam. And Avelina wasn't alone in her research. Many wolves were studying ways to combat fury. Even Greg was looking for solutions. He was actually the one who found the moon petal flower. However, it didn't solve his problems. It helped a little bit, but not as much as he would hope. There is an item in the game that tells a little bit of a scary story about the relationship that Greg had with his wife. You can see that the legs of the telescope are kind of broken and been replaced by another piece of wood. And this item tells the story of how one time in Greg's fury mode, he actually broke her beloved telescope and then replaced the legs of the telescope using some wood panels from a door frame. But that just goes to show how unhinged and dangerous he is. It is known that werewolves actually lose their memory during their fury, so they might do things that they really regret. And yes, Avelina was super understanding, and Greg talks about how lucky he is to have her, but I'm sorry, this relationship just screams toxic. And now Avelina is gone, and we don't know exactly what happened to her. We can only speculate, but there is a really creepy note that you can find. It is written in a language that only werewolves can understand, but it's been translated into "Forgive me, my dear Avelina," and that is just extremely concerning. I mean, did Greg have anything to do with her disappearance? Greg was never the same since. I mean, he already had a lot of issues, but that just compiles into his issue pile of trauma. The weirdest part is that there was a werewolf cure that was discovered early on, but Greg actually refused to take it, and the reason why might shock you. He refused to take it because he was worried about how it's going to affect his relationship with Avelina. Weird, right? He does say that they have a fated mate bond, and that is a bond that only two werewolves can have. So he was afraid to lose that bond, and that's why he didn't take the cure. But in the end, he lost her anyways. Very concerning indeed. We don't know for sure why Avelina is gone because there are two other options. For example, using a telescope is very connected to other things that can happen to you and could make you go missing. One of them is getting kidnapped by aliens, and another one is getting hit by an asteroid. There is a very eerie passage in Greg's diary. He says, "I have no use for my weaker form anymore. No reason to be anything other than a beast." So there could be two explanations why he chooses to be a beast. Either he wants to forget everything that happened, because when you are in beast mode, your memories are non-existent. Another reason could be that maybe he was in his human form when Avelina went missing or died, and maybe now he feels so upset with himself for letting her go that he chooses to remain a werewolf because he believes that this is the stronger way to live, where he can protect others. But it doesn't make complete sense because he does choose to live alone. Maybe he chooses to live alone to protect others from himself. Now he lives alone, surrounded by warning signs. He attacks anyone who gets close to him, or at least intimidates them. Greg isn't just angry at the world, he is angry at himself too. And I am kind of angry at him too. I mean, this whole Avelina story really screams domestic violence, and I do not like that. Unpopular opinion, I know. I also don't like this idea that Avelina was just okay with the way he was behaving. Yes, she was trying to help him, but overall, she never condemned his behavior. She was always super forgiving and always super nice about it. And I'm sorry, but what he was doing is just not okay. I don't think it's cute, and I don't think it's acceptable. Previously, I told you the story about Maria Volkov, the mother of Christopher Volkov. Maria was a very disciplined werewolf, and she's actually famous for a few things. One of those things is having heated arguments with Greg. Those arguments were about what werewolves should be, what is the future of werewolves as a whole, because remember, this was still a new concept at the time. And Maria argued that werewolves have the responsibility to practice self-discipline, while Greg was more on the side of we should be able to express our true feelings and connect with our natural instincts. Maria had a very easy time controlling her werewolf fury, and it does have something to do with the fact that her werewolf companion was extremely disciplined, so in turn she became that way as well, whereas Greg didn't have the same luck. But she thinks it's just an excuse, and she actually believes that Greg is just jealous of her abilities to control herself. Sorry to sound like Maria Volkov, but Greg needs to learn some responsibility for his actions. The mystery doesn't end there, because aside from being a big abusive baby, Greg is famous for another thing, and that is turning Sim into werewolves. So why is he turning all the Sim into werewolves? If he wants to be left alone so badly, why keep creating creatures that will inhabit his town? We know for sure that Greg turned Lou, Lux, and Celine into werewolves. There could be more because other werewolves don't really know who turned them. I suspect that he turned everybody into a werewolf except for the ones that were born with a werewolf legacy, like Christopher. Is this just because he's unhinged and violent, or is there a deeper meaning? Because let's not forget, there is another monster lurking in the shadows, turning Sim into creatures without their consent. And his name is Vladislaus, the vampire. Both of these men are relics of a forgotten war, but the war never really ended. So here's my theory. Maybe Greg sees himself as a sort of a savior, turning Sim into werewolves before Vladislaus catches them and turns them into vampires. Because once you're a werewolf in The Sims 4, you cannot be turned into a vampire anymore, and vampires don't even like to drink from werewolves. They find it disgusting. Maybe in a twisted way, Greg sees himself as a good guy. Where Vlad gives you a coffin, Greg gives you a forest. Greg knows exactly what it's like to lose control, to see yourself as a monster, and to hurt the people that you love most. But he also knows that you can be something much worse than a werewolf. And in his eyes, there is nothing worse than a vampire. And remember, 1 like equals 1 therapy session for Greg. So what do you think? Is Greg the monster that everybody should fear? Or is he actually helping people? And what do you think happened to Avelina? Subscribe for more juicy lore because I put so much effort and so much research into these videos, and I'll see you soon.